Hello and welcome to episode 229 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. This week, CATL, the world's largest battery maker, announced their next generation battery for heavy-duty vehicles, including buses, will last for up to 2.8 million kilometers of driving. That means the average amount of North America drives annually, the batteries will only last 140 years. However, the good news is that's approximately 138 years longer than the average Facebook meme claims EV batteries last.
California is using robots to control wildfires. These are machines that create controlled burns to prevent future burns. It's like a Zamboni, but with fire instead of ice. And that's not really a joke. That's actually a very accurate description of what it is.
India is spending $1 billion plus to subsidize EVs, but only 2- and 3-wheeled EVs. Plus, and this is true, they are also electrifying the ambulances needed to pick up the injured riders of those dangerous contraptions that use only 2 and 3 wheels.
Yikes. The Hague becomes the first city in the world to ban fossil fuel advertising. This joke brought to you by Casper Mattresses. Casper, the finest name in podcast advertised mattresses.
All that and more on this jam-packed edition of the Clean Energy Show.
Oh, I wish we were sponsored by Casper Mattresses.
Sure, or really, any mattress company, even the bad ones.
All right, it's time for Brian's Movie Corner.
Brian's Movie Corner.
All right, so this came up a few weeks ago, the movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit, because General Motors and other companies way back in the 30s or 40s conspired to purchase and dismantle the LA transit system and other transit systems, correct?
Which was news to me, complete news to me, and I had no idea.
Yeah, so the plot of Who Framed Roger Rabbit is based on a real life event, and General Motors, they paid like $1,000 fine or something like that.
Wow, that must have really taught them a lesson.
Yeah, but this is part of what led us down this path that we're in North America of hugely car-centric cities, especially Los Angeles. So anyway, I decided to watch the movie again. It's from 1988. And I'm going to play a clip here. This is Christopher Lloyd and Bob Hoskins. And this is that part of the movie where the bad guy explains his dastardly plan to the good guy.
Construction plan of epic proportions. We're calling it a freeway.
Freeway? What the hell's a freeway?
8 lanes of shimmering cement running from here to Pasadena. Smooth, safe, fast. Traffic jams will be a thing of the past. Soon, where Toontown once stood will be a string of gas stations. Inexpensive motels, restaurants that serve rapidly prepared food, tire salons, automobile dealerships, and wonderful, wonderful billboards reaching as far as the eye can see. My God, it'll be beautiful.
Come on. Nobody's gonna drive this lousy freeway when they can take the red car for a nickel.
Well, they'll drive. They'll have to. You see, I bought the red car so I could dismantle it.
Which is true. They did.
Yeah. They did.
Which is amazing.
The red car was the transit system, the street cars that ran on rails, and they were electric, and it's all gone. So Toontown is the name of the cartoon town in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where the animated characters are from, and also the nickname of Saskatoon, the city near us that I sometimes visit.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. It's still not a very good movie. I don't know. I never really liked it when it came out.
I never liked it either. It's praised by a lot of people. Even in recent years, I keep hearing praise for it. But I'm not a movie critic. It just didn't rub me the right way. Did you now notice the plot a lot more, considering where you are in life now compared to then? Like the whole GM thing, or do you remember that? Because I don't even remember that aspect of it.
No, I don't remember that. It's really not dealt with very much. Like, it's really just, it's kind of only mentioned twice, like at the beginning and at the end. It's just generic bad guy plot. Like, he's a maniac that wants to, do something maniacal.
But there must be a documentary on this whole thing, right? I mean, the whole plot by car companies to buy up transit so that they could take over the world.
I would think so, yeah. But it's an amazing technical achievement, which is what I thought at the time, and maybe even more so now, because it's 1988, it's pre-CGI, so they had to combine all these hand-drawn cartoons with live action, and it's really well pulled off. Like, it's quite spectacular how they managed to do that. Now, I suspect it's been cleaned up slightly here in the 21st century. Like, the original prints probably had some, like, dust specks on them and stuff. That was always the downfall of the old-time special effects, is you would end up with bits of dust on the optical printers and whatnot. So I didn't see any dust. So I think it's been cleaned up slightly, but still an absolutely spectacular technical achievement.
I have to see the documentary, I have to see that, because that's and then we'll just talk about it on the show, because I know you said you wouldn't read a book, but maybe there's an article that a newspaper article that brings it up, Brian, you can now listen to those articles on a lot of news sites, major news sites. So you don't have to read, you don't have to use your eyes, just your ears.
We'll look for a documentary, and if someone out there knows about one, or perhaps we'll have to make it ourselves. So I don't want to talk about this too much. But, James is often fantasizing about living somewhere else, living somewhere more progressive, because we kind of live in the middle here of fossil fuel country, and both sides of the political spectrum support fossil fuels and continuing fossil fuels. And one of the safe havens in our minds has always been British Columbia, the west coast of Canada, where Vancouver is, Vancouver Island, Victoria. It's always seemed like a much more progressive place, and a place that I'm, be interested in moving. But the Premier of BC now is talking about getting rid of the consumer carbon tax.
Well, he's under pressure from the Conservatives for once, and they might lose that, and it would become a very significant shift. Like, the Conservatives are actually fairly right-wing in a fairly left-wing mountainous community, think Seattle or something like that.
But it's sort of, there's a bunch of fall elections here in Canada, and Trudeau's carbon pricing, and it's not a tax, it's a price on pollution, but his carbon tax, I don't know, the other parties can smell blood in the water. Like, this is maybe the thing that's going to defeat.
It's the cost of living, the interest rates have gone up, and this is the time that they can finally attack the carbon tax when people are, having trouble buying groceries and things like that. But the stupid thing is that most jurisdictions get the money back and more. Most people get more money. So they're actually going to be worse off if you get rid of the carbon pricing on a consumer level. I mean, it affects industry as well. And then they say, well, it increases the price of groceries. It's like 1 penny or 2 pennies per $100. It's almost, nothing. Like, a gentle breeze would raise the price that much.
It's political posturing. It doesn't have anything to do with reality. And it reminded me of back in 1991 is when the GST came in here in Canada. This is the Goods and Services Tax. And this was the most unpopular thing I can ever remember politically in my lifetime. It was a 7% sales tax federally on basically everything, goods and services. And it was brought in by Brian Mulroney, the Conservative Prime Minister at the time, in 1991. And nobody wants to pay 7% more for everything. So this was roundly hated. And then 2 years later, he lost the election, or the Conservatives lost the election, in the greatest defeat ever in the history of Canadian or possibly world politics. They were
But we've been through several election cycles federally since it was brought in, and I was kind of surprised by it because the opposition parties would call it a tax, and that sort of, even journalists call it a carbon tax, and we've been accused of joining that parade because we're so used to hearing that sort of term. But it's really frustrating that that's happened, and it's made it through several elections, but now it's like time to kill it, and it's proven to work. And other countries in the world are looking to do it. And BC's had it for longer than the federal government has, and most of the data in the world comes from BC to prove that it works. So it's not perfect. It's not an end-all solution. It's part of a puzzle of addressing climate change, but it's a free market, in a sense, right-wing way of addressing the problem, because the market has to adjust, and it does. It's stupid. It's just incredibly wrong to attack something that's working, and in fact does not in fact hurt your pocketbook.
And the difference, of course, like the GST was hated by pretty much everyone, but people do support a price on carbon. So it's not universally loathed, but as I say, the other parties can seem to smell blood in the water.
Now, this September, Brian, where we live here in Canada, used to getting cool pretty quick. When Labor Day comes, summer ends for us here. Not this year. No. Last year, it was a warm night, and there was a thunderstorm in the middle of the night. It felt like summer. I'm actually confused. My whatever it is that my seasonal instincts are all out of whack. It's like, having the midnight sun or something, and it's just wrong. And now tonight is going to go down to barely room temperature. It's not even going to get cold. We could be having snow this time of year. I mean, brief snow, like flurries that melt instantly, but it's happened. We've had frost this time of year, and tonight I'm going to have to turn on the air conditioning because we have a wind that makes me downwind from the oil refinery, which I just closed my window. I'm really aware of winds now with my air filtration system, or my air purifier that kicks on. The big expense of it is it has an air detection unit that detects bad things. And sure enough, the oil refinery is one of those bad things. And when I wake up in the middle of the night and I see that thing blasting full and the lights are flashing, I have to get up and close my window, which interrupts my sleep, but then I'm breathing in. It's just, no good. I wish the world would embrace EVs and that damn place would shut down. And, there's an instance in the States where there's a pipeline that blew up that is right next to a residential area. That's just like me. Yikes. Pipelines aren't supposed to be next to residential areas, but it's very much the same. So what's different about them is they have a corridor for power, electricity. So the electricity's down as well. But all those people, I don't know, hundreds had to evacuate. That could be me one day. And they're just letting the natural gas blow out of the pipeline, and that's going to take an undetermined amount of time. Brian, in Alberta, there's a place called Charge Stop, a business, a franchise business, which opened its first location. It is essentially a gas station without gas, and I've been waiting for this day for a long time, which is why I mention it. Yeah, the name of the place is called Charge Stop, and they have the intention of 25 locations across Canada by the end of next year. And they are charging really well, but it's pricey. It's even pricier than a Tesla for non-Tesla users, which is, it's pricey. But you can go in and you can buy stuff, and there's washrooms. That's the two things you need. And I'd love to start a business like this and have it just perfect, just delicious food and perfect washrooms, and all kind. That would be perfect for a charge stop.
There's a real art to knowing where the good bathrooms are to stop on a road trip. It's super important.
And I think people sort of mention that in their reviews on PlugShare and other apps where you rate the chargers. We were recently asked by a listener to find podcasts on the Chinese auto market and supply chain advantage that they have. And this isn't the perfect example, but I did come across Michael Dunn on a podcast. Not that a podcast that I listened to, but I saw it promoted and I got interested about it. It is actually a Canadian podcast called The Change Optimist. It is a small podcast that does interviews from time to time. And he was on there. I'm going to play a clip. This is Michael Dunn because he spent decades, since the mid-'80s, in Asia as an auto analyst working for different companies.
There is a big story to tell. And what makes it really fascinating is that, to a large extent, Americans and Canadians have not yet gotten the memo. And what I mean by that is there's been an earthquake, a transformation in the global auto industry. China is now the center, whether we like it or not, whether we're ready to accept it or not, by every measure. Capacity. They have capacity to supply half the world's demand. They produce twice, 3 times as much as the United States. They export more than anyone else in the world. They build more EVs than all other countries combined. the battery and battery supply chain totally dominated by China. And yet here we sit in North America, in Canada, and the United States and think, what? But the reality is we're on an island here. And if you go to Europe or Southeast Asia or Latin America, you're going to see a surprising number of Chinese cars, more every month.
Yeah, you can get the full interview and on what's it called? The Change Optimist podcast. A link hopefully will show up in your show notes if our writer decides to put it in there. And when I say writer, I mean the AI gods who do our writing for us now. China is the number one supplier of vehicles in Mexico already, Brian, and North America.
I have no idea.
North America supply chain is non-existent. He says mineral extraction and refining just to catch up would take 5 to 7 years to get up to speed. And Michael Dunn says they would go with the dealership model, China, like BYD, for example, in North America, because they'd want to build allies. But ultimately, since they own everything, including the ships, which we've talked about, they're building their own ships to transport the cars. Talk about owning your supply chain. I mean, my God, they would want to probably go to a direct-to-consumer model like Tesla. He's guessing eventually because they want to own everything. But initially, they would have probably a dealership model too. And I think they're doing that in other parts of the world as well. South America, Africa, Europe. But since the, So, Michael, just this morning, just before the show, had a tweet, and I thought I'd read it to you. He says, China's stunningly low car prices are a product of a unique national arsenal, tough to match anywhere else in the world. He lists it. Scale, speed, the speed at which they come out, which can be a detriment because sometimes they overlook things. But generally speaking, we don't know what the long-term reliability is yet, but we will get data on that soon. Supply chains, of course, subsidies, of course, from the Chinese government. But he says they're also in survival mode 24/7. They are working really hard. In other words, they're working a lot harder than our sorry-ass automakers here are, who... Yeah, subsidies are not an insignificant add-on, he says. They are central to the plot. He says, to live another day, global automakers must pivot to extreme urgency, which they are not, Brian, at all, and make that shift into survival mode. This is not a rehearsal, and here is my hot take. It's a James Whittingham hot take. The 100% tariffs that America and Canada placed on Chinese EVs in the last year will kill the North American automaker, not save them. Because before the tariff, they were working hard to catch up. Now they put their feet up and said, well, we'll just see what the market does. Well, guess what? Yeah. The market everywhere else is changing. If you can buy a quality EV for less, for even half as much, my God, you're toast. Goodbye, automakers. So if you work in the auto market, I'm sorry. I think it's putting your finger in a leaky dike, and the water's going to come rushing in eventually. This is not going to change anything.
It can be protected, but maybe only for so long. All right, from Bloomberg, we have a machine here that I have dubbed the Zamboni of fire prevention, because that's pretty much what it is. It's it's called the Burn Bot. It's a tank light robot that helps manage wildfire.
Brian, whoa. I think we need to explain what a Zamboni is, because
oh, yeah, that's right.
Even our American listeners won't know what a Zamboni is, most of them.
I apologize. It's a ice resurfacing machine that is very common here in Canada, the home of ice-based
what exactly do they do? Do you know, as a former hockey person, do they scrape the ice and put water down? Do they melt the ice? Do they sweep it?
It's a small kind of truck that's got a bunch of hot water in it, and it scrapes the ice, picks up any snow that's on the ice, and then lays down a fresh sheet of water onto the ice.
So in between periods of a hockey game, there's 3 periods in a hockey game, you would bring that on before the game and after, and they remove the nets and do that. And this is the most glorious job of the slow moving machine. Some guy gets to do that for a living. And that just happens. We also talked about electric Zambonis as an aside.
Yeah.
But because, you're burning diesel or gas inside a building, and that could be problematic, which it was for one of our local rinks here in a small town recently.
Yeah, no, I remember that as a kid, watching the Zamboni drive around the rink and smelling the fumes and thinking, wait a minute, we're not supposed to run cars indoors, are we?
No.
Never mind, kid. Just get on the ice. So it is a The BurnBot, a tank-like robot. It uses less manpower. It's sort of like remote controlled. And it has, kind of the same size as a Zamboni, maybe a little bit bigger. It's, the size of a small truck. And instead of laying down a fresh surface of ice, it's a controlled burn right underneath this machine. And it leaves a path of burnt stuff and leaves, very minimal smoke. There's a lot of advantages to it. We have to really start thinking about what to do to manage wildfires. As we know, there's just been an insane increase in wildfires because of climate change.
And we've let the forests just grow because we didn't want them to burn. And that was a problem in Jasper National Park in Canada this summer. A great deal of it burned, and it was very unfortunate. But we also just left it because we didn't want it to burn. We wanted people to enjoy it. Well, now they've got nothing to enjoy.
Yeah, now a lot of the climate change deniers will sort of jump on the Jasper story and say, oh, it's just bad forest management. That's the only reason that it all burned, because you do have to manage forests, especially ones that are near cities, and controlled burns are a thing.
Also, it costs money to do that, and people don't. We want to lower taxes all the time.
Yeah, so yes, for the last 100 years or so, we have probably prevented too many forest fires, and so the dry tinder kind of builds up. But of course, without the extra dryness and hotness of climate change, these fires would not be sparking quite so much. So this is a nearly smokeless machine, apparently. It combusts these things so well at such high temperatures that it kind of burns the smoke, and it can be used in dry conditions. So one of the problems with controlled burns is you can't do it when it's too dry out, because you just run the risk.
The right conditions for it, and sometimes the weather shifts and things go badly. But this is very controlled, and I don't know how they achieve the smokelessness of it, but it's very cool that they do that.
Yeah, no, it's quite wild. There was a statistic here about the wildfires in Canada this year have been so huge. It was now I can't find it. Give me a second here. Anyway, there's only a few of these machines, but it seems like a promising technology.
There's two of them.
Yeah, there's only two of them.
And there's a crew that sort of goes around and makes sure that there's no flames around. But for the most part, it's got this steel roller on the back, and it's just a little bit of smoking bush that's left behind, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, and we really have to rethink all of this kind of forest management strategy. So, Jasper, this town in Canada that a lot of it burned down, and we have other amazing mountain towns in the Rockies that are vulnerable. And, hopefully somebody is looking at all of these issues. Sprinklers sometimes, like certain buildings or communities are sometimes protected by sprinklers, and perhaps we need those kinds of barriers. But here's the statistic from the article I thought was wild. Last year, wildfires in Canada spewed more CO2 than all of Mexico. Because the problem with these wildfires is that they also expel CO2 into the atmosphere, which is a greenhouse gas, which just
they're basically storing the CO2 and then releasing it when they burn.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's a real problem, and I think about it in terms of I'm still hoping to build a new cottage at our lake property. It's in a forest. It's a boreal forest in a provincial park, and we never worried too much about forest fires when I was a kid. But again, that forest has been protected now for a very long time because it's a provincial park. And, at a certain point, it could all go up in smoke. And maybe we need to, if we build a rammed earth cottage, that will be somewhat fire resistance. But, the entire thing isn't rammed earth. There'd still be some wood in the construction. So I don't know. I think we have to think about that.
Yeah. I've often thought about that myself. What would I do in an area like that if I had a home? A metal roof is possibly one thing, but then you've got sort of what happens is that the windows explode. I've only recently learned this. Is that it gets hot and then the windows explode and then the embers go right inside the dwelling. So whatever you have in there is, but also you might have to do forest management at your cottage. I remember being out there when you let us stay there during the pandemic, that there was extreme fire threats, and it actually was on my mind, because I think there was only one road out for one thing. And I was, had that in the back of my mind, what would happen, because there was lots of lightning strikes and things were tinder dry some years.
Yeah, when it's very dry, they have a ban. You're not allowed to have a campfire and stuff like that. But I don't get the feeling that anyone really thinks it's going to happen. But they probably didn't think that was going to happen in Jasper either.
And it's an unusual place. It's on the middle of the prairies on a high elevation with it's like this little plateau that has this forest for I don't know how many miles square, but it's sort of this oasis of forest in the middle of the prairie. And it would be a shame if that went up, but I felt like it could have,
And when I was a kid, they had a fire tower in the park, which was common.
Really?
Back in the 60s and 70s, a large fire tower, and they would employ people to sit up there and watch for forest fires.
Wow.
That tower has been gone for a couple of decades. So
it burned down.
Yeah. But I don't know, maybe they monitor with cameras or something. I don't know. But
well, they still would require a tower then, because there are still fire towers, and most of them are automated now with cameras.
Yeah.
And they use AI to detect them.
The Bloomberg article cites, basically fire tech is one of the new frontiers in technology. So there are companies working on things like autonomous drones that can spot wildfires. But a related story here also from Bloomberg is the world's most desperately needed airplane is back in production. And this is called the Canadair, and this is a water bomber. And I don't know if I have to explain this like I have to explain a Zamboni, because these are fairly common around here. But it's an airplane that can skim a lake, pick up a bunch of water very quickly, and then it flies over the forest fire. It dumps the water.
It's a flying tanker. Yeah, it's a big plane that lands on water very quickly, scoops up water, shuts its hatch, and somehow takes off again and doesn't crash.
Yeah.
and I don't know how they do that. They must have little baffles in there.
Yeah.
But it also must pump it in there if they have the baffles. It can't do any scooping. But yeah, and then it takes off and it's very maneuverable. And I guess they haven't been in production in 10 years or something like that.
Exactly. This is made by the Havilland Aircraft of Canada. And they were able to line up enough orders to put the plane back into production, with countries around the world are ordering enough planes that, this is going back into production. So this is another thing we're going to be using in the new reality of forest fires.
It's only 20 bathtubs full, but still.
Yeah, I think
seems
it's the
to
fact
work.
that it can reload so quickly. It literally just skims the water to pick up the water.
There are other planes, but they have to land at an airport and fuel with fire retardant stuff, and it takes time. I've seen the process happen. It's not fast.
Yeah, and we use helicopters for that as well. Helicopters that have some kind of a big kind of tank hanging off the bottom of it.
Last time I was in Banff National Park in Canada, I was camping, and there was a fire over the other side of the ridge, and you would see the helicopters with buckets flying over.
Yeah.
And of course, that just made you more concerned. Yeah, the climate change has made me run from fires, Brian, even at your cottage. Like it's a new reality we live in. The fact that I'm sweating here in the middle of my podcast morning, and it's mid-September, and I should be cool and have a nice autumn breeze coming in, and yet I'm too hot to maybe even make it through the whole show this week. I might have to have you go on without me.
So about 20 years ago, we rented a helicopter and a helicopter pilot to shoot some film for a short film that I was doing. And it was hard to find. There's not a lot of helicopters around here 20 years ago, certainly. There's a few more now. But we had to get a guy that was fighting forest fires in northern Saskatchewan on his way home to Calgary. He was based in Calgary, and we made the inquiries, and he's like, oh yeah, I can stop in Regina. And we spent an afternoon with him shooting film off of his helicopter, which now you can do with a $200 drone. But back in the day, it was a very expensive venture to rent a helicopter and shoot 35 millimeter film from it.
I had this friend named Scott Watson. I know a few of our film alumni are listening, so I mentioned him by name. And he's a very successful film person in Vancouver now, and Hollywood occasionally. And he was very ambitious, like some people were in film school, with making action movies, going way beyond what they should be doing with zero money and experience. And he rented a helicopter. And that was just legendary.
I remember that, yes.
$500 an hour back then. And I'm sure it's 4, 5, 6, 7 times that now. Barry would know. But yeah, drone you can go buy and use it infinitely. And the batteries in that, lithium ion, they're getting better. You can use them for almost three times what you used to be able to use them for. Pretty sweet.
Yeah, and I got some advice from Barry, if you're listening, Barry, about how to shoot the helicopter stuff and what equipment to get. We had to rent this nose mount thing, which had to be mounted to the helicopter.
Oh, where did you get the nose mount thing? That had to come in from somewhere far away. Had to come in from
Vancouver. The camera came in from Vancouver. It had to be bolted to the nose of the helicopter. My God, what a ridiculous operation.
The guy was okay with you bolting it to his helicopter?
Oh yeah, standard thing. Like it's one of the things.
It's like a GoPro
pilots,
attachment on a scuba gear or something now. Like
it's they're made to go on helicopters, and back then, especially 20 years ago, that would have been one of the jobs you would do as a helicopter pilot is shooting for movies.
Okay, well, we got to move along here. CATL, the world's largest battery maker based in China. They have a large, lead over everyone else. BYD is second, but quite a few percentage points behind. Info from the story, Brian, is from Electric. It is from Bloomberg. It is from the CNEV Post and Interesting Engineering, and maybe even some other places, because I had not each of these stories covered everything I wanted to talk about, so I had to go to other places. I actually watched the live stream of CATL from an auto show in Hamburg.
Wow.
Which just came up on my YouTube while I was having lunch the other day. And yeah, they had a presentation. This is about the batteries, not for transport EVs that you and I would drive, but for buses and for large equipment, anything like right up to shipping. Okay, so this is a different category, two categories, buses and heavy-duty vehicles and ships. So these new technologies, they got a new name for the technologies, and this is including a battery that lasts 15 years and 2.8 million kilometers lifespan at an event in Germany that they talked about, and it can withstand 72 hours of water immersion and get to 60% state of charge in 12 minutes, 70% state of charge in 15 minutes. So they have a long lifespan version of these batteries, and then they have a fast charging, whatever works for you. If you have a very fast charging, it's going to short your lifespan, but for your business, it might make sense. Bus batteries from them now last 15 years or 1.5 million kilometers. That's 20% improvement over the last generation of batteries, and God knows when that came out, maybe 12 months ago. I don't know, the way they're moving so fast. It is warranted for 1 million kilometers or 10 years, and it will enter mass production soon. 13 companies are standing by waiting for this. I remember reading a story about electric buses coming to our city, and I couldn't find it. I spent a lot of time trying to find that story, couldn't find it for some reason. They'd mentioned that part of the expense was replacing the battery after 8 years. And I was really surprised by that and discouraged by that. And it didn't seem right. This is a Canadian company that's making these, Novaform or something like that is making these electric buses. So it will enter mass production very soon. This is another thing, when we hear about battery improvements, it's always like, we'll get to it someday, sometime this decade. And with the Chinese market moving as fast as they do, it's like weeks or months before you actually see it in products by the time they announce it. So yeah, entering mass production soon. 13 companies are already standing by waiting for this before they even announced it. 175 watt hours per kilogram. That's the energy density. That's important. You don't need to know how that compares, but it is a 22% increase in energy density from their last generation of bus battery, which means you can store more energy in the same weight and volume of the battery space that it takes up. Always very important. Also, this is good for us, it works in minus 35 Celsius. So
wow.
Totally certified to work to that low of a temperature, and also hot temperatures, which doesn't concern us as much, but it does work in very high humidity, both extremes of temperature scale on Earth. CATL accounted for 31.6% of global EV battery sales in the second quarter of this year, and BYD was second with a mere 14.7% of global battery sales, but CATL is leading, and it's incredible what they're doing, Brian, because they have so many people working on this. They have something like 21,000 engineers, not assistants, lab assistants, 21,000 engineers, chemical engineers working on improving batteries. 21,000, that's a city. And if you include the support workers for that, it truly is a modest-sized city of people working literally around the clock because they are monitoring the tests to see how new chemistries work around the clock, and people actually monitor that in the labs. It's just incredible what they're doing and just taking off really quickly.
All right, I guess it's time to dip into the mailbag. All right, this letter is from Richard. Hi, James and Brian. I really like your show. On your September 4th show, a listener wanted other resources. You likely have heard of these, or at least some of them. In addition to your show, some shows I also really like are The Fully Charged Show, Everything Electric. Those are kind of the same thing. The brand started as The Fully Charged Show, and they're trying to transition to Everything Electric. I guess they think that's a better name or a brand. Also, Monroe Live. It's a YouTube and a different podcast that appears to feature various experts. He says he hasn't listened to the podcasts. The YouTube videos tend to be very technical and are varied with experts, and they do full series of videos with full teardowns of EVs, as well as some surface-level overviews. If someone really wants to go in-depth and learn about how well-made various EVs are and how they work. Daily Charge Up, just started listening to this one based on recommendations, a very short daily podcast with the latest news. All About Disruptions, which is a show on YouTube. Rethink X, who we've mentioned many times. It's an overview of disruptions that are coming and connecting the dots more about disruptions. So regards, Richard. First off, you should listen to the Clean Energy Show, but if you have some spare time, there's a few other options there for you.
All right, this letter is from Chuck. Hey, guys, I heard a story on Minnesota Public Radio about gas cooktops being a factor in causing asthma. I already have asked a couple of my friends to do research to confirm what I think I heard, but if you have any information about cooking cooktops and linkage to asthma, I'd be interested to hear. I unfortunately have a gas cooktop myself, and I think that my sister has asthma, has a cooktop also. But if you have a gas cooktop, based on what we know, we should change to induction. As also, we talked about it, induction's faster and more efficient, and there isn't actually an advantage to gas. There's a, with all the cooking show porn that's on the Food Network these days, people decided that gas was a thing in the last 20 years to make better cooking for you foodies out there. Not true, though.
Yeah, we've covered this before. There's been a lot of spending by the natural gas industry to make you think that gas is somehow better for cooking. It is absolutely not. We got rid of our gas cooktop about 2 years ago, put in induction. The induction is fantastic. We love it. There is no reason to go back to gas. I'm sure, as we've said before, certain chefs definitely would have a preference for gas. This is probably what they're used to, and might be difficult for them to switch. But no, burning gas in your home, it's a terrible idea.
Terrible idea. And, if you have a gas cooktop, you're not going to have that 220 volt system there, the wire, right?
Yeah.
Because did you have one?
No, we didn't. So the first thing I did when starting to do these upgrades was upgrade our electrical service from 100 amps to 200 amps. So yeah, we may not have been able to do that. So it's not like this is a cheap thing. Like there are some induction cooktops coming out that can use a regular circuit. They don't need
with a battery. They have a battery to
that's right.
Get up to. Yeah, it's actually quite interesting. And plus, I think you could use it when the power goes out for a little bit.
But heat pump water heaters, that's an issue as well. You sometimes need a lot of power for those, but some are coming out that can use a regular breaker. But yeah, it's not going to be necessarily easy for everybody, but we definitely did it here.
So yeah, Chuck, studies have shown that gas stoves raise the risk of childhood asthma by 30%. It's not a guarantee that if you grew up in a gas stove home that you're going to have asthma, but of course the gas leaks. That's one of the issues, not only the cooking, but just a slow leak that's there all the time. I swear I can smell a tinge of natural gas in my laundry room where the water heater and furnace is sometimes, so I keep the door closed. Yeah, so there's studies have also found that unburned natural gas leaks from stoves, and this gas contains benzene, a known carcinogen. So beyond asthma, there's the carcinogens in the gas that can cause bad disease. As you know, a 2013 meta-analysis of 41 studies found that gas cooking increases the risk of asthma in children, and the NO2 exposure is linked with currently having a wheeze. Most recently, a study published last December found that 12.7% of childhood asthma cases in the United States can be attributed to gas stove use. So varying degrees there, but the answer is absolutely yes, it can cause asthma. By the way, we had a previous episode, at least one episode on this, and that is episode 152 from February 2023, and the link is in your show notes there. If you want, also the link to what I think is the story that Chuck was listening to, the NPR thing, is there. It's called "There's a Battle Over Your Gas Stove," and climate change and etc. is there as well.
Even if you don't believe in climate change, why are we burning things that cause pollution, that are unpleasant, unhelpful?
Especially pollution in your own home.
In your own home.
Kids get diseases.
All right, another letter here from David. Guys, great show today. This is the September 12th show he's talking about. I totally agree with your comment on getting folks to drive our EVs to dispel all the FUD, the misinformation put out by those entrenched in the fossil fuel economy. My 34-year-old son needed a car, so I offered him my 3-year-old Chevy Bolt, which is an electric car that James has as well. It was a great car with no issues, even with the battery recall. I completely enjoyed driving it. He said no. He wanted a gas-powered car. I told him to think about it, as I was not going to buy any more gas cars. He was willing to drive the car for 2 weeks while my wife and I were on vacation. Over vacation, I thought about his situation and decided maybe I should give him our 5-year-old Subaru Ascent, since he has a wife and 3 kids. However, when I returned and offered him the Ascent, he turned it down. He was in love with the Bolt. Our electric prices in town are about 8 cents a kilowatt hour, so his costs were 25% of a gas-powered car, not including the lower maintenance costs, which would have been something like $0 for 3 years of driving the Bolt, to about $300 for a gas car just for the oil changes. Keep up the great show, and by the way, while riding my bike around town today and listening to your show, I could smell the gas exhaust of the cars that passed me. Why would anyone want a gas car knowing we can clean up the air with electrics? Go figure. Thanks for the letter, David.
Amen, David. That is absolutely true. And, my son's got problems with his car. He just had his alternator fixed on his gas car, and it's broken again, and he's really upset about that. And I used to have that problem all the time, Brian, and sometimes it was the regulator, sometimes it was the battery, sometimes it was the alternator, regular thing. And I'm so glad to say goodbye to that. Ancient history now.
When people talk to me about their problems with, I needed, a new spark plug, like my eyes just glaze over, because this is like, I've been driving electric for almost 5 years now, and this is just ancient history, and we need to move past it.
We love to hear from our listeners. Please contact us by email, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com, and you can also leave us an online voicemail message at speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow.
All right, from Electrek, The Hague is the first in the world to ban fossil fuel advertising. But not just for fossil fuels themselves, but also for highly polluting services like airline and cruise vacations, fossil gas suppliers, and best of all, gasoline-powered vehicles. You can no longer advertise gas-powered cars in The Hague. So this will apply to mainly outdoor advertising in the form of billboards, displays in outdoor walking areas, ads on and inside the transit, and so on. The Hague had previously announced its intent to be climate neutral by 2030, so the city finds this to be a necessary step towards that goal. The Hague wants to be climate neutral by 2030, then it is inappropriate to allow advertising for products from the fossil industry. Fortunately, the city council now recognizes this, says the spokesman for Party for the Animals, which is, I guess, a party over there, which sounds a bit like a punk band or something. But
it does. It does.
So the country is also among the best in electric car penetration, with just under half of new vehicles being electric. But the bad news is, unfortunately, the Netherlands stands behind other countries in the area in per capita emissions, because despite their heavy use of bicycles and EVs, of course, bicycles are huge, each Dutch person emits about 50% more CO2 than the citizens of nearby France, UK, or Denmark, and twice as much as nearby Sweden, and this is because they still have a lot of dirty coal and fossil gas on their electricity grid.
I guess, the one thing about the Netherlands is that they have an advantage of that I hadn't thought of before, was that when you're a leader in this area, if everyone did it at the same time, gas cars would be of no value. But now they can just ship them to elsewhere in Europe that are still using gas and diesel vehicles while they go to 100% electric. Quickly, Brian, India has approved a 2-year scheme with an outlay of $1.3 billion US to provide incentives for increased adoption of electric vehicles as the South Asian nation works to improve its air quality. Big issue in India, indoor and out even. Two-wheelers account for 56% of the 3 million registered EVs in India. So EV sales have jumped 45% in the fiscal year that ended March 2024. Annual sales could hit a 10 million unit threshold by 2030. Subsidies have been provided to incentivize electric 2- and 3-wheel vehicles, as well as e-ambulances and e-trucks. So they're staying away from passenger vehicles with 4 wheels and concentrating on that for some reason, very specifically not doing that. The scheme is expected to support about 2.48, well, let's call it 2.5 million electric 2-wheelers, 316,000 E3-wheelers, and 14,000 e-buses, which sounds like a lot, but not in India. It's the biggest country in the world. Electric cars and hybrid vehicles have been excluded, and there's a link to the story if you want to read more.
Yes, and electrifying 2- and 3-wheel vehicles, as we've said before, is a huge step, and especially in a place like India. All right, on a similar topic from Electrek, some news from Norway that we talk about a lot because they are pioneers in electric vehicles and electric vehicle penetration. We know that new car sales in Norway are, I think, above 95% all electric now, which is fantastic. But of course, that doesn't replace the entire installed fleet. It's still, even with 100% EV sales, there's still, gas and diesel cars that are going to be on the road for a while yet. But it's, surprisingly good news. So the good news part is EVs have just surpassed gas cars in terms of the installed base on the road. So there's about 750,000 EVs on the road in Norway and about 750,000 gas cars. And because the EVs are selling so well, that basically the tipping point is right about now in the middle of September. There's expected to be more EVs on the road than gas cars about now. The bad news is they still have about 1 million diesel cars. So the diesels still outnumber, and the diesel and the gas together still outnumber the gas cars. Diesel, of course, much more popular in Europe and Scandinavia. So, but still, I don't know. I thought that was hugely encouraging. Like, we talk about how long it's going to take to change the fleet over. That's not bad progress. That's basically about a third of the fleet is electric now in Norway.
And honestly, why would you want to drive a combustion vehicle if surely in Norway, you've had a taste of EVs, either with cabs or with car rentals or with friends and neighbors. Who wants to go back, Ryan? No one. It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy and transportation.
Spain's Prime Minister commits 40 million euros to subsidize e-bikes and expand public bike share schemes. He also called for the country's mayors to stop seeing the bicycle as an ideological symbol and to recognize its true mobility as an alternative for urban mobility. That's nice to hear from a country leader, Brian, to say, hey, stop demonizing something. This is from CNN. Upstart solar farm to take over a transmission line from a dying Minnesota coal plant. We've heard of this before. The coal plants die, they go out of business, they're not profitable, but they have this big grid connection, right?
Yeah.
For almost nuclear power size. And so you just walk in with your solar panels and set up shop and you're good to go. And batteries as well. And by the way, batteries are really taking off in solar farms because, and here's another thing, I'll take the first solar farms we had around here were 10 megawatts, which weren't very big. And I went and looked at one by Weyburn, and they said that they were, the peak output of it was 13 1.3 13 megawatts instead of 10. They wanted to make as much power as they could. Well, they have that 10 megawatt grid connection. That's the most they can put out. But in the rest of the day, maybe they can put out more than they otherwise would. But when you bring in batteries, you can still sell more power to the grid because then you're selling it at night or in the morning when the sun isn't at its peak. And you can still have that grid connection and still sell more of your product, which is great.
Yeah. If there's a limit to the grid connection with a battery, you can basically be pumping out the energy at the grid limit the whole time.
And that's why people are doing that. If you build solar, you build batteries. 95% lower fuel costs for battery electric gasoline speedboats. So if you take your speedboat and make it electric, you're saving 95% cost. That is the biggest cost that I know of in electrifying something, because I know people who go out and water ski, they spend a lot of money on gas in just one day. And my brother-in-law insisted that we would pay money for going out in his boat, just to go on his boat without the water skiing. Both make the same round trip in Stockholm and Finnish Åland Island. This was a 278-kilometer trip. The gas cost 750 euros for fuel, but the battery electric speedboat cost 40 to 50 euros. That's 95% lower. So if you got a speedboat, might be a lot cheaper to go electric and a lot quieter. World's largest sailing cargo ship delivers 1,000 tons of cognac and champagne to New York City. This is the first time in 100 years a cargo ship crosses the Atlantic, mostly by wind. It has a diesel backup. And it's time for a CS Fast Fact. New nuclear being added to the energy mix worldwide adds these days only as much electricity in a year as renewables add every few days. Fun fact, China is now installing wind and solar capacity equivalent to 5 new nuclear reactors every week. Yeah, just suck on that for a while.
Wow.
The last blackouts on California's main grid were August 14th and 15th. Not this year, but in 2020. Why? Because there was no batteries at the time, hardly. Now there is. And guess what? No blackouts. But you would have politicians on the right say, renewables will crash our grid. You will come home to burst water pipes. Opposite is true. The absolute opposite is true. The battery degradation rate in modern EVs has gone down by almost 25% in the last 5 years, probably because all the crappy Nissan Leafs have been flanked by other brands, because there was a terrible battery in that. Mine's only like 60% of what it used to be, but not bad for the worst battery ever made. I'm still running that vehicle until the front suspension falls apart any day now, which I dread. It's happening, Brian. The IEA confirms world oil demand growth is slowing sharply and surging EV demand is taking up the slack. China's high-speed rail network is also a part of that, because they've expanded their high-speed rail, and the accelerating global clean tech rollout are a big part of the reasons why. Chile produced 9.4% of its primary energy from solar last year. That is the highest of any country that year. And finally this week, what am I going to do? I'm going to talk to the tweet from Assad Razzouk's weekly tweet on good climate news. This happens every week on his Twitter feed. And every week there is a plethora of good stories that just will blow your mind. Every single week we try to cover some of them here on the show. He says, number one, global oil demand growth slowing sharply, says the IEA, the International Energy Agency. Number two, Britain's reliance on coal-fired power set to end after 140 years. We mentioned that on the show before. Three, oil products demand in China peaked in 2023. Number four, California able to keep the lights on this summer due to extreme heat waves, in large part because of battery deployment. Just mentioned that. Number five, China plans to include steel, cement, and aluminum in its carbon market from 2024 on. That's good, because industry is hard to decarbonize. And boy, howdy, they are working on it over there. Asian Development Bank to devote 50% of its annual lending to climate finance. That's good. And it shows the speed of renewables over there. UK blocks approval of the first coal mine in 30 years. Also mentioned on the show. Scotland's only oil refinery to close next year. I wish mine would close. What a life I would have here if that. I would dance for days. The Hague is the first city to ban fossil fuel ads mentioned on the show this week. And tens of thousands in South Korea protest a lack of climate progress. That's good to hear. China's top economic planner announces that the country will accelerate the construction of a new power system. So they are not sitting on their laurels. They are saying, hey, we got all these renewables. Let's upgrade the power system and make it different and new. Big Oil faces rapidly rising number of climate lawsuits, he says in his last tick. And that is it for the lightning round.
Is basically a roundup of all of our favorite topics here on the Clean Energy Show. And that's it for this week. You can contact us at cleanenergyshow@gmail.com.
And we're all over social media as Clean Energy Pod. We'll see you again in 7 days.
See you next week.